The Medical Courier Connection podcast is brought to you by Key Software Systems, powering couriers with an automated and innovative dispatch software solution. We will drive the heavy lifting that keeps your business innovative with the latest technology so that you can focus on building connections with your customers.
Hey everybody, hey everybody, hey everybody, hey everybody, Ken with Integrity, Ken with Integrity, Ken with Integrity, Ken with Integrity Medical Courier Training.
We are providing on-site training in Roseville, Minnesota.
A man's digits turn blue due to too much cannabis use. A woman in Melbourne, Australia dies after being scratched by Minty, her cat. Stole the hearse and dumped the body on the side of the road, still strapped to the gurney, and then continued on with their joyride. A dog had to be put down after it was crushed by a package thrown over a garden fence, its owners claim. So, stay compliant, my friends. Get all your medical courier training needs from us at www.integritydelivers.com.
Welcome to the Medical Courier Connection podcast.
Yeah, this is exciting. Yeah, I love our intro. I gotta get a straight face here. I keep thinking of the guys that digits that turn blue, and then I'm waiting for Chris to look at his fingers. But okay,
they're still good.
They're still good. All right, wonderful. So we have the pleasure today of interviewing Carl Bennett. And Chris, you got a brief bio on Carl. Would you like to read that for a second?
Yep.
A little background.
Carl is the current chairman of the Radiopharmaceutical Shippers and Carriers Committee, radioactive medicine's top transport lobby group in Washington, D.C. We've been honored to have him as a guest speaker at our Medical Transportation Summit in 2013 and often refer courier services to him for their required compliance training or transporting nuclear medicine safety. Welcome, Carl.
Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Good to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. Yeah, Carl, I was thinking earlier about how we connected. You know, I've met more people on LinkedIn. So if you're a courier service and you want to legitimize your business, you ought to have a LinkedIn profile. But Carl, you reached out to me. We were talking about a timeline the other day. It would have been, I guess it would have been like 2012 to start talking about just developing a relationship. And we invited you to the 2013 summit, and you brought a serious legitimacy to that summit because it was hard getting speakers lined up for an unknown convention. You graciously came in and brought some incredible information to that meeting.
Well, it was a privilege to be there, Ken, and it's always a joy to help you and your team out whenever I can. And I just think, given the seriousness of the concerns related to nuclear material, really important topic, and I wanted to bring whatever I could share to your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Carl. It was a great event. I'm hoping maybe we can do more of those in the future, but that's on the back burner for now. Do me a favor and tell us a little bit more about your history, about your background. We read a brief bio, but there's so much more to Carl Bennett, and I'd love you to share with our audience if you don't mind.
Well, I began really in aviation back in the early 80s with purely a courier. And then I moved on from there to a company called US Check, which then went public and became AirNet Systems. And while I was at AirNet Systems, given the background in heavier cargo, this was a smaller package, overnight delivery. We started to pursue the life sciences, and part of that was nuclear medicine. Principally, the industry, the manufacturers and hospitals turned to us because we compressed the window of time for transporting the generators and the dose units from the manufacturer or from a nuclear pharmacy to the hospitals and then eventually into the patient. And, FedEx, while they do a wonderful job, and this is not a critique at all, but at the time, if you don't make their box by 5 p.m., you're going tomorrow. And we were able to offer, at least going east to west, we could pick up or recover shipments of this material, which is a lot of these radioactive medicines have a very short shelf life. So we could pick them up as late as midnight on the East Coast and still get them delivered to a patient for a very early morning procedure on the West Coast. Wow. So that was very attractive to the industry. And, I served as the senior regulatory liaison there for a while. And then when I left AirNet, I started this firm, Transportation Resource Partners, LLC, to help air carriers, other air carriers, and ground couriers be able to comply with and listen. Compliance is one thing, being safe is another. And so I've been a safety officer, regulatory guy for a long, long time in air transportation. I just completed my master's of safety, master's in aviation safety at Florida Institute of Technology last April. I believe that we should always be learning. My motto is ABL. We should always be learning.
Yeah.
At my age, and I'm not 30 anymore, I think it's important that we keep going. And our clients appreciate that commitment. You're an educator, obviously, Ken. You know the value that brings. So
Yeah.
that's kind of today. Today, I work as a safety officer. I'm actually a vice president of an air charter firm, and I also continue to help our industry. I'm a vice president of safety at the air charter firm. Forgive me. And I also still continue to work with the radio farm industry because I had a friend who I lost to cancer back in 1998, and I'm not a doctor and I'm not a clinician, but what I can do is find a way to make one of the things that I love, which is aviation, and make aviation work to help people. And so when I help people transport medicine, I'm indirectly contributing, I hope, to someone's well-being.
Awesome. That's really important because when it all comes down to it, at the end of the day, it is about human beings and about patients. There's a person behind every sample, behind every nuclear med dose. Absolutely, it's about patient care and it's about real people. Do you mind sharing briefly about what you're doing in Washington D.C. With that association, if you don't mind?
Sure. Well, but when I was at AirNet, when we started to enter the life science world and transporting for the nuclear medical medicine industry, we became aware of an industry association or a lobby group. At the time, it was called the Radio Pharmaceutical Shippers and Carriers Conference, and a couple of years ago, we changed it to committee. But that was back in '95 or '96. It's been almost 30 years, and there were two carriers at the time, air carriers, us, AirNet, and FedEx. And surprisingly, after being a member for a couple of years, they try to rotate the leadership every so many years, every 2 years actually. From a manufacturer, there's a chair and a vice chair, and then they try to rotate the leadership from a manufacturer and a carrier. And it was time for a carrier member to be the chair, and they actually elected me. I was quite surprised they elected me over the FedEx guy, which he was very capable, very knowledgeable. I owe his name was David, and I owe David a lot of debt because he helped us learn a lot. But it was a pleasant surprise, and I was able to lead the group, and that was back in 2003. And then I've been part of the group ever since. And then just recently at the last December meeting, they elected me to the chair again. I had been serving as the vice chair for the previous 2 years, and we made some significant inroads. RSCC is really, I say a lobby firm. That's not really what we do. Lobbying is a terrible term for it, but it does explain that we are in Washington regularly working with the Department of Transportation, with Pipeline Hazardous Materials Administration, PHMSA, who writes all of the dangerous goods regulations, or hazmat. The two terms are interchangeable. And we regularly dialogue with them about the kinds of changes that they're proposing to nuclear packaging, to nuclear shipping, to any requirements for training, to registration of ground vehicles, all that kind of stuff. So we have a direct conversation on a regular basis. We meet twice a year formally in Washington. And then we also we've retained a radiation health physicist who guides our membership through a lot of the technical aspects, if there's any assistance that they might need. But having that direct connection is invaluable. When the Department of Transportation proposes a new rule, maybe your audience isn't familiar with, there's a process. They issue what's called an NPRM, a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, and they give a period. They announce something like that in the Federal Register, and then there's a comment period for a couple of months, usually, sometimes 90 days, maybe longer. And that's the industry's opportunity to write in and say, how will this change you're proposing? How will this affect us? So you can either be for it or against it, and it gives you a chance to have a voice. And RSCC is part of we have a liaison with several other industry associations. One of them is known as the Interested Parties Group. And that is from all walks of dangerous goods, from explosives to flammables, anyway, we have a voice there as well. So between the two organizations, we believe that we make a huge contribution. If the DOT paints with a big broad brush and doesn't identify the fact that we are carrying something that the end users call a patient, that we're not shipping tennis balls and videotapes. This is very serious stuff,
Yeah.
and it makes a significant contribution to people's lives. So if they make a rule that all of a sudden adversely impacts the transport or end user of our product, that can be dramatic, and it can drive up costs. It can delay shipment. It can not deny care, but it can interfere with care. So there's a lot at stake there, and so the RSCC is doing important work to make sure that the end user, and what's surprising is the end users, the patients, probably aren't even aware of who we are, but we're out there advocating for ourselves. But if we are successful in doing that for ourselves, we're successful in helping the patient get what they need.
Okay, excellent. Let's shift gears just a little bit. We are Integrity Medical Courier Training. We are on multiple social media platforms. We started on TikTok, to many people's chagrin, actually mine as well. I had deleted the TikTok app because I downloaded it and I found myself just endlessly scrolling, watching people do stupid things, dancing, and it was just like, no, this is stupid. I hate it. Then one day, my daughter, who works for the American Heart Association, she said, "Dad, you need to be on TikTok." And I said, "No, I hate it. I tried it. I wasted a lot of time. It's a time killer. No, thank you." She said, "Listen, no, you don't understand. Millions of dollars are spent on TikTok. You need to be on TikTok." So reluctantly, I re-downloaded the app. Chris and I started throwing videos up on TikTok, and one thing led to another. And now we're training literally hundreds of drivers every single day that are finding us on social media. And it's really been a boon to our business. Now, on the downside, you have a lot of social media influencers that are enticing people into the industry when maybe they don't have the aptitude or the skill sets, and they're getting all these people started as medical couriers, selling them their courses, and I've seen people delivering nuclear medicine without any training, um any visible training or safeguards. So that's the danger. But I wanted you to talk a little bit about that, if you don't mind. What do you see as some of the possible risks in this? And you can get as nerdy as you want into the the actual technical dangers, but I'd like to hear from you as a person that's been in the industry really for decades. What could be some of the dangers or risks to thousands of couriers getting into the industry, transporting it, and not being properly trained?
Well, first of all, you've got a compliance concern, which it is a requirement of the 49 Code of Federal Regulations, the 49 CFR, which are the federal government regulations that govern transportation. Then you get into certain parts of that, and there are specific training requirements for people that are going to. Yes, thank you, Ken. Specific requirements there with regard to there are tens of thousands of chemicals out there.
Yep.
And they're categorized as hazardous materials or dangerous goods. And I guess I mentioned the two terms are used interchangeably. So as I use those freely, I hope your audience will understand I'm talking about the same thing. But in the 172.704 of subchapter H, the training requirements are found, and they're pretty simple, but they can get complex depending on what you're carrying or transporting. And in paragraph A of 172.704, it says hazmat employee training must include the following: general awareness and familiarization training. Secondly, they have to have function-specific training. And third, this is one that's missed a lot by some of I want to say the word fly-by-night. I don't mean to demean anyone's training, but your quicker, swifter, less expensive training is going to lots of times not address safety training. And then depending on the kind of the amount of the quantity of materials that you're moving, you may have to have security awareness training. And then if you're really going to carry a lot of dangerous goods, you've got to have in-depth security training. So those are the 5 things that you have to have: the general awareness, function-specific safety training, security awareness, and possibly in-depth security. I want to talk just for a second about what segregates my firm from many of the other training alternatives that your clients may be interested in,
Right.
is that I believe that by its nature, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that when we use the word nuclear, or when we use the word radioactive, a lot of people's eyebrows come up, and because while we remember it from our high school days, and we're certainly familiar with the atomic bomb, and but a lot of people go immediately to mushroom cloud, risk. Uh, am I going to go sterile by being exposed to these packages? Those kinds of questions, and you've got to really be careful and not be terribly critical of people for having those concerns, because they don't work in the industry. They're an average Joe, a man on the street, who is perfectly capable of performing all of their driving functions and all of their delivery duties. But this term, nuclear or radioactive, gets people alarmed. What my firm specializes in is certainly delivering the general awareness training, certainly delivering the function specific training. But what we really focus on is the safety training. We dive into, and the purpose of this is to make sure that the drivers and the handlers of these packages understand the small amount of risk, but there is risk to exposure to gamma radiation with some of these packages. Now, we can get into it as far as you'd like to go, and go as deep as you'd like to into the makeup of the packages and why they're so safe. But employees, or I'm sorry, drivers who have not been exposed, no pun intended, to this industry might hear the word nuclear or see a trifoil or a symbol and go, wow, I don't want to get anywhere near that. So what we try to do is spend a considerable amount of time educating them on the limits of exposure that they're allowed to receive in the workplace. The fact that the packages are in fact very, very sturdy, very resilient. In the United States, there's never been an injury, a radioactive injury, to a driver or anyone handling a radioactive medicine package. That's how solid the integrity of the packaging is. And we do have to talk about, because the packages do emit ionizing radiation, even albeit at small levels, that can alarm people. And so what we do is we go into the history of nuclear energy, and we talk just briefly about exposure and what the difference is between exposure and contamination. These packages are so resilient, and some of them do contain liquids, but that's rare. But the packages have to be oriented with the arrows up. That's for a reason. We have to be careful of these packages because they're high value packages, and there is the risk of exposure if we overexpose an employee or a driver to ionizing radiation. Now, all of that can be addressed in the training. We explain to them about separation distances, how far do they have to be away from the packages for certain lengths of time, depending on how long the trip is from pickup to delivery. All those factors have to be considered. And if you're learning how to do this on TikTok, all deference to TikTok, you're probably not going to be able to spend the kind of time that you need to invest in your driver, and that your driver really wants to learn about what's at stake for me. And so I think that's what separates my firm. I think we're a little more, dare I say, we're a little more concerned with and dedicated to the safety training than the average run-of-the-mill training online or on a disc or a self-train environment.
So, Carl, what separates transportation resource partners from any other dangerous goods training program? Because I know there's a lot of HAZWOPER courses out there that take hours, if not days, to complete. How is your course different?
Well, our approach takes the regulations literally. When we get into subpart H and 172.704, there's a paragraph in there about function-specific training. Okay, that's one of the things you have to satisfy. I take that quite literally, and rather than sending your team, if you're a manager of a courier company, instead of sending your drivers, taking them out of the driving capacity and sending them to training for 2 or 3 days of immersion training, to where they have to learn how to do every type of dangerous good under the sun. If they're only going to do this one function, they're only going to pick up radioactive medicine and deliver it, then quite literally we'll teach them how to do that function. So we do insist that they get a general awareness module, which tells them all about the 9 hazard classes. In other words, the 8 that they're not going to do, they have to have an awareness so they don't pick that up by mistake and try to transport it. But we really hone in on okay, we're going to talk about class 7 radioactive material, specifically radioactive medicines or radiopharmaceuticals. And all of the training hones in and focuses on just that.
Okay.
Save the company that we're training thousands of dollars, saves them a lot of time, gives them a very focused training, and why waste your time learning how to do explosives when you're only going to carry nuclear material? Why waste your time on even flammable liquids if you're not going to do them?
Right.
So our training certificate specifically identifies that we've trained for function-specific capability to do class 7 radioactive medicines. It says that on the certificate. That means you can't pick up nuclear waste, you can't pick up fuel rods, you can't take them to the local nuclear plant, you can't do anything like that. But we satisfy the regulation by honing in on it exactly that way and meet the definition of function specific.
Yeah, that's really important. So we've done some of those deliveries several years ago. Integrity Medical Couriers. We had a client. Actually, Cardinal had a local lab here, and we did some deliveries and we handled the packages. Chris, I don't know if you got a chance to throw out the picture of the guy with a cart of those cases, but they didn't require us to have a what's it called, a dosimeter. They didn't require, and the actual training requirement at the time, we had gotten clearance from DORA, Department of Regulatory Agency here in Colorado. And how we got the clearance to transport that, they looked at our training program and they said, "Oh, you guys are good to go." Now, that was many years ago, and that could be Colorado just being a little more lax with their regulatory oversight. But we did a few of the deliveries, and so I'm vaguely familiar with it. But I think the biggest concern is that people in the industry. So on TikTok, there's influencers saying, "Get the bag, get the bag, get the bag." What they mean is get the money. And so they'll look at a lab specimen as an opportunity to make money. Get the bag. They'll look at nuclear medicine or chemotherapy drugs, which we also train on, as an opportunity to get the bag, get the bag, get the bag. And so safety training helps them understand that, listen, there is a small level of risk to you, but it's never none. It's never zero. It's never a zero sum game. So yeah, what you're talking about resonates with me because, again, people will call me every single day. My company says I need hazmat training. My next question is, what is the hazardous material you're transporting? Well, it's blood. Well, okay, well, blood is technically not a hazardous material if it's infectious category B. That's another topic entirely. But I always want them to identify what's the hazardous material they're transporting, and then they need function specific training for that material. I showed you the book. Like you said, there's thousands of chemicals in this standard, and they interact with each other. We got a mushroom cloud, and now you got to evacuate a community. With nuclear medicine, that's not the same thing, but they still have to be compliant with the regulations in how they do their job as a courier transporting nuclear medicine. You can't just grab that bag and off you go. You got to understand the risks and the proper handling and transport. So what would be the actual risk? And I don't want you to give too much away because we're going to offer your training at the end of this podcast. What are some of the real world risks for a courier that's just delivering tons of nuclear medicine, no training, no awareness? What's the danger? Are we talking sunburn here? Are we talking something more insidious?
No, not sunburn, but look, exposure to ionizing radiation it's axiomatic. I mean, it's mathematical. Just a real quick safety lesson here. The nuclear packages come with what is called a TI rating. That's the transportation index, and what that comes from, that number is derived from how much radiation is given off from the package at a distance of 1 meter, so about 3 feet, over the period of 1 hour. And so if you have a radioactive package that is 1 TI, 1.0, you're getting, if you were to sit next to it at 1 meter for 1 hour, your accumulated dose, if you will, would be 1 millirem of radiation, of ionizing radiation. Okay, we're allowed by law on the job, the OSHA, Occupational Safety and Hazard Administration, allows us to, while we're working, receive the maximum of 5,000 millirem or 5 rem per year while on the job. Now, you and I, as we're sitting here, Ken, I don't know what kind of ceiling you have there, but there's ceiling tiles.
Yeah.
You've got some materials in them that are emitting radiation. The drywall in my office is emitting, but if I walk out in the sun, I'm going to get ionizing radiation. We're all exposed to natural background radiation at all times. And we all can, if we take care of ourselves and we eat well and work out, we can live to be 80 or 90 years old today, right? But if we turn to overexpose ourselves to ionizing radiation, then we can get into the degradation of tissue and cells and that kind of thing. Now that's if you were to work in a radioactive plant, a nuclear facility, and there was a breakdown and a meltdown, and like at a Chernobyl where people are exposed to tens of thousands of millirem in a very short period of time. That is not possible with this type of transportation. It simply isn't. A typical road in a van with 6 or 7 packages of radioactive medicine that are all 1 or just over 1 TI, possibly, you're going to have a group of 10 to 12 TI. And if you put it at the back of your van, you are now several meters away from it. And if you're only driving it for 45 minutes, you're not even around it for an hour. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't travel more than a few hours, but we need to do a couple of things. We need to distance ourselves from the packages, and we need to make sure we understand just how much radiation is being emitted from the packages. So we tally up all the TI, the transportation index. If you've got 10 packages at 0.5, okay, then we've got, what do we got? We got 5 TI total. And there's a chart in the 49 CFR that tells us how far do we have to be away from that, and for how long can we be around it. And it's really manageable. The packaging is comprised of cardboard, very stiff cardboard packages, sometimes ammunition cans, the containers that you've got there on the screen right now. And inside those, the reason some of these packages are so heavy is that the nuclear material is inside what's known as a lead pig. It's a very heavy, I'm going to call it a capsule, and it's made of lead. It usually weighs between 15 to 25 pounds. And of course, that adds significant weight to the other packaging. It might be styrofoam, insulation, there might be absorbent material. But the nuclear material itself is the amount that's inside a very big package. Like those are medium-sized packages there. It might be something, a solid or even a little capsule of liquid that's as small as maybe your half of your pinky fingernail. Okay, so the packaging is very robust, and it's very heavy because of the insulation and the lead shielding that limits the amount. And of course, once the package is put together, the measurement of the transportation index is taken at 1 meter from the package, and then if we gauge how much radiation is coming off that package. So the risk, though, is that we want to be careful and we want to know what we're doing there so that we can monitor how much radiation we're receiving every time we handle or place a package in a truck. There's requirements that we have to secure the packages. We have to block and brace them so they don't roll around in the back. It doesn't do us any good if we put them at the back of the van and we hit the brakes and all the cargo flies forward, then we've not satisfied our separation distance. There's also the concept of ALERA, which is as low as reasonably achievable. We want to always maintain our exposure to these packages as low as reasonably achievable. The ALERA concept goes hand in hand with anything nuclear. I can go further into depth, Ken, but bottom line is, you want to equip your drivers with an understanding about exposure and how to minimize it and how to manage it. And almost everyone I've ever trained has thanked me afterwards, saying, they learned something they didn't understand before, and they feel safer now that they understand exactly what's at stake. What can they do? What shouldn't they do? I'm a safety professional, so I'm always about risk management. And we're simply managing risk as effectively as we can. We can't eliminate risk in our daily lives, but we can mitigate it. If we wanted to do that, we'd never leave the house. I work at an air charter company. We could be 100% safe every day. we could park the airplanes in the hangar and never leave, and we'd be out of business in 30 days. So we all address a modicum of
Right.
risk every day,
Yep.
right? So what I help my trainees do is understand the risks and how to manage them. We also talk about things like work practices controls. You don't want to take a high TI package like a 1 or greater and then grab it and carry it against your chest and walk down a half mile of hallways. Now, if you did that a couple times a week, it certainly isn't going to injure you. But if you're doing that year after year after year, every day after, there's going to be a cumulative effect, right? You're going to get overexposed potentially. Again, that risk would be small. But to avoid that, we want to put those packages on a handcart. We want to push it or tow it. Those are the kinds of work practice controls, little things we can do that, again, helps us keep our exposure to the ionizing radiation as low as reasonable achievable.
Okay. So two things. Number one, did I hear you say correctly? The more packages, that picture that Chris shared a minute ago of a guy basically transporting what appears to be like 10 packages in a medium size SUV.
Sure.
The more packages you have, the further away from the person they have to be. Did I hear that right?
Sure. Yeah. I can't see all the details of those packages, but I didn't see any yellow labels there. So the TI of each one of those containers is probably very low. It's probably less than 1.
Okay.
I can't tell if that's a radioactive weight 1 or weight 2, but just pretend they were all 1s. Okay. I see
Okay.
5, and he's got a 6th one he's shoving back there. So
Yeah.
got a 6 TI. What we train people to do is to assess the load, assess whether or not we can make what's known as the separation distance, and keep them from the appropriate distance from their driver. Clearly the back of the vehicle, since the driver's in the front generally, and make sure that we're satisfying that. And that separation distance is found in the regulations as well. So
Okay.
you do all this work ahead of time. You work with your client, you work with your shipper, and you determine, or maybe it's a manufacturer, maybe it's a clinician, who knows, maybe it's nuclear pharmacy, and how much do you expect us to carry? And you determine that load ahead of time, and that determines what kind of vehicle you're going to need, how much separation distance you're going to need, what's the length of time in transit from the time that the driver shows up and is getting exposure all the way to the time where he drops it off. And again, I don't want to alarm people when I say exposure, but there really isn't another way to address it. Again, we're getting exposure to more than background radiation that we get every day in our daily lives. So we have to monitor it. And if we find that we are going to start to push the limits and possibly overexpose ourselves in terms of the OSHA requirements, if we're going to get more than 5,000 millirem per year, then we may have to do some dosimetry work and actually ask the drivers to wear a badge that monitors their exposure. And then those badges are exchanged every month. You get a new badge. You go a 30-day period, you send that in, and the badge is processed and read. You can determine how much radiation that employee has received over the course of that month. There are numerous companies out there that provide dosimeters and analysis, and then you can get a radiation health physicist to help you assess that. There's one key thing that people need to know if they're into this at that level, and that is that the 5,000 millirem has to be monitored quarterly. So you can't get 5,000 millirem, the limit for a year. You can't get all that in one quarter. You're limited to 1/4 of that. So you can only get 1.25 rem or 1,250 millirem every quarter. If you go over that, you have to stop and you can't do any more work until the next subsequent quarter. So there are structures and limitations in place that a lot of the cheaper, more expedient trainers don't pursue. And, you can go take an online course and it takes 30 minutes or an hour. And you got to ask yourself, have you really gotten the in-depth understanding of all that's facing you as you agree to go do this work? So, yes, my firm charges a reasonable amount for expertise. It's not inexpensive, but it's not unaffordable either. And we tailor almost to a company. We have pricing, of course, but we don't stick with that. If you come to me with 25 drivers that need training, we're going to work with you and make that affordable for you. If you come to me with 2 drivers, and you're questioning, gosh, do I really want to get in this business and spend this money on this driver? First of all, whether it's an independent contractor or an employee, I think you have an obligation ethically to understand what you're asking them to do and then equip them appropriately with the safety training and knowledge for them to make a decision whether that's what they want to do. So, it depends on how dedicated you are to your team, how dedicated you are ethically to people that are asking them to do something that's inherently dangerous but not life-threatening. It's manageable. It's all of the controls that are in place and the regulations are there to help the industry do it safely. And I just think that strict adherence to that kind of training and to that regulatory compliance it's not even a question. So we're not affordable for everybody, but then if you're really dedicated, and the other thing I'll mention, Ken, is that the manufacturers or the clinics that are worth their salt are likely going to ask you before you engage in this, can you provide us with proof that you're educating your drivers and your team, and that they're not only responsible, but they're educated and they understand the risks here. And I've seen scenarios where some of the major manufacturers, I won't name them, but when a carrier or a courier or any kind of transport entity has not provided that, they'll pull the business because they have something at stake here. It is not legal for them to tender packages to a courier or a carrier, whether it's air, rail, ocean, or highway. They can't do it unless they've verified that the firm that they're contracting with is trained and aware of the risks they're taking.
Yeah.
So, that's something to consider as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. In my years of training, I've been doing this 21 years in bloodborne pathogen, OSHA and HIPAA. And there have been multitudes of stories of people that have had incidences, whether it's an exposure incident or smashing a specimen or whatever. Sometimes it happens with people that have been doing this for years and years and years, and they get complacent. You mentioned the scenario of somebody walking down the hallway holding that package to their chest. And I guarantee you that there's people out there right now that are doing that. So my question then, again, we're both risk managers. So what would be the worst case scenario if you got a gentleman that's been doing this for years? It's Fred. We love him. He's been doing this, but he's been, maybe he holds that thing to his chest briefly, throughout the day for 20 years. What are we talking about?
Well, I don't want to get into specifics and about injury or anything because it's really unlikely, and I don't want your audience to come away from this with a fear. In fact, the goal is the exact opposite. There's information out there that I can provide, that other trainers can provide. There are work practices we can put in place. Information's out there to allow you to manage this safely. It is not nuclear waste. It's not going to Yucca Mountain. It is not. Look, let's remember, these pharmaceuticals are for ingestion or injection into the body. So we are taking this material and putting it directly into someone's body to treat them or to analyze them, diagnose them for about cancer, most likely. So that said, being inside the package, protected by the lead pig, being distanced from it for quite some period, all of those things satisfy. Exposures are absolutely minimal with regard to handling the package. Now, here's kind of a strange example. If you're to take these 1TI packages and you built an igloo around yourself, of all these 1TI, and most of the packages are not even close to one. But let's just, for the sake of discussion, build a little igloo around ourselves and put a chair in the middle, and the boxes are all 1 meter around me, and you've got 50 of these. So you've got 50 TI at 1 meter. So you would be getting 50 millirem. If you sat there for an hour, you'd get 50. Now, no one's going to do that. No one's going to surround themselves with the packages. The packages aren't ever in a quantity more than a couple, maybe 10 to 20 if they're at the back of the van. And if you're putting them on a hand cart to deliver at one location, you're probably taking in 1 or 2 packages, maybe 3 or 4. So, the other thing is you'd have to sit there for hours and hours and hours to get what we call an acute dose of radiation. So that just isn't likely, and it's not, not advisable, and it isn't realistic. Also, remember that many of these pharmaceuticals, I don't want to go into the entire litany of educating your audience on radiation safety, but all these radioactive material has what's known as a half-life, or for better terms, shelf life. And as soon as it's produced, it starts to decay, starts to become less radioactive. Now, some things have, at Hiroshima, we have half-lives of hundreds of years, which is why that was such a devastating incident with the nuclear explosion. With these radioactive pharmaceuticals, some of them have shelf lives or half-lives of 90 minutes. So in 90 minutes after the product is produced, if we don't get it to the patient in 90 minutes, it's only be half as effective as it would be when it was produced. So again, if you were to surround yourself in my example of an igloo, remember that not only is that unlikely, but if you did it, all of those shipments are decaying at the same time. So their exposure to you is lessening at the same time that you're sitting there. So, I mentioned earlier that it's axiomatic, it's all mathematical. We have the tables, we can calculate all that and do this very safely.
Okay.
Some of the examples I give are kind of silly, but I try to make it user friendly for the man on the street who doesn't want to become a nuclear physicist or a nuclear scientist and wants to simply go out and make a living delivering and making this contribution to the nuclear industry. So.
No, I mean, it's okay. That's the example I'm looking for. And so we've shared stories. I mean, we speak from, time to time on a weekly basis. I'll call you and I'll say, you're never going to guess what I came across. And so unfortunately, my mind always goes there because I have so many examples. I'm going to share one with you, all two with you. In regards to dry ice, and it's a different animal. But I had a lady call me and ask me to help her with a bid on transporting 1,000 pounds of dry ice in her transit van. She had a 3/4 ton Ford van. And if you know anything about the industry, those big blue containers that couriers go in to get their dry ice from, that's 500 pounds. So you're talking two of those big blue containers of dry ice pellets in a vehicle. And then I asked her, so tell me about ventilation in your van. She said, ventilation? And I'm like, no, please don't bid on this. Please don't do this work. That's one example. One summer we had two courier companies in different parts of the country where the situation was similar. A driver was doing a line haul with a big cooler full of dry ice, 200 pounds of dry ice, in the cab of the pickup truck, in the seat next to him with the windows rolled up. One guy pulled over alongside the road, passed out. The only reason they were able to find him was they had a GPS on the truck. But those are just two examples of people, okay, having one box of container of nuclear medicine, in the back of your vehicle, safe distance, minimal risk at best. But 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 repeatedly over time. Okay, so there's a difference. You said it's a mathematical equation. The more you're transporting, the closer it is to the person, the greater the risk. But all right, so we're not going to talk about what the risks are: tumors, cancers. We have a chemotherapy course that we offer to our trainees, and the guy that trains that course. I mean, there is some risk of transporting that medicine itself. And I could share stories if we had more time where drivers were exposed to the actual chemotherapy powder, skin cracked, they swell up. It was a big deal. So we're not saying that there's absolutely no risk of transporting nuclear medicine, especially if you do it safely, especially if you get the training from Carl and Transportation Resource Partners. So really the emphasis isn't on fear or what could happen. It's, hey, let's get the training and certification. Let's put the barriers in place. Let's understand what we're transporting. Let's do it safely and properly every single day. Mitigate the risk. The driver is safe and the patient gets the treatment that they need.
Yeah, and I wanted to draw a distinction there, Ken. You mentioned in your example just a minute ago with the chemotherapy drugs. Chemotherapy drugs can contain some radiation, some isotopes occasionally, but generally they're chemical based, and some of those chemicals are pretty dangerous, pretty harmful.
Yep.
And they're administered to patients in a very strict regulatory environment, in a very sanitary environment, et cetera, a very clinical. There is a difference, real quick for your audience, in the terms of radiation exposure, which we've been talking about, and then there's radiation contamination. Now, exposure, you can't avoid it. I'm getting exposed right now from my ceiling tiles to radiation. It's minimal. It's what we call background radiation, as we discussed. But the radiation you're getting exposed to by handling these packages, while minimal, it is regulated and does need to be managed and worked with appropriately. Now, if perchance, and this has never happened in the industry, a contamination occurs, that's physical material coming into contact physically with radioactive material. It can be washed off, it can be cleaned off, but it does stay with you, for a period. So anybody that's seen the film Silkwood, where the gal that was working at the nuclear plant, they felt she got overexposed, and they sprayed her with a fire hose and had to brush her skin off with metal brushes. It was really pretty dramatic, actually. Mm-hmm. But there has not been any contaminant threat with regard. These packages are so robust and so reliably good. It generally what's referred to as the Type A package is what our industry is going to encounter, and there really is not a contamination risk. Although I do touch on the difference between exposure and contamination in the training, so that equips the driver with understanding the difference. The other thing is that in the safety training, if you will, is that we talk about emergency response, so that if, say, the driver has an accident and they've got their dangerous goods paperwork on board and it's within reach, and that they get pulled over for a speeding ticket, and just in case the officer or the investigator looks in the back and sees the radioactive symbol, that can go south really quickly. If they don't understand what's at stake there and what's really going on. This is medicine for injection and ingestion into someone's body. I'm simply taking it to the hospital. This is not a nuclear weapon. This is not any kind of threat. But we've had scenarios that have extrapolated out. I've shared some of these with you, to where we had an aircraft once that had to land on a highway in an emergency, and as soon as the first responders realized there was radioactive material on board, we had state troopers, we had helicopters, we had military, we had highway shutdown, we have all this stuff, and it's just it's comical if it wasn't so sad, that because it wasn't communicated effectively, the nature of the packages and the nature of the aircraft that landed on the highway in emergency landing. A lot of people got alarmed over really, I don't want to say nothing, but all of that presence of the military and all the emergency vehicles and closing down highways just wasn't necessary.
Wow.
So, like so many things in business, whether you're in the medical business or the legal business or whatever, communication. We have to communicate to each other what we're doing, why we're doing it. And part of that's education. And so I come from a family of educators. I never really desired to be one, but one way or another, here we are. And I enjoy my friendship with you because you're a fellow educator. And we see the value of sharing important information with people, which affords them the opportunity to go forth and do something, make a contribution to themselves with a livelihood, to a manufacturer, to provide a service, and ultimately to a person who needs this drug, to improve or help them improve their life. And it's just a serious business. It's not impossible, but it does require some study and some dedication. And I just would encourage everybody to think very clearly about, do you want to do the minimum, or do you want to do something effectively and efficiently? And there's one more thing I'd mention, Ken, and that is, I don't want to scare your audience, but the penalties for not complying with some of these regulations are significant. Years ago, and I think it's increased somewhat, if you were discovered to be doing this without the proper training, you can't prove that you've had the training and that you're competent and capable, you can receive a fine simply for an error on the paperwork, or say you can't provide proof of training, or say you haven't blocked and braced your packages appropriately. You can receive a fine at it used to be $27,500 per incident. And of course, if you have generally, when one of these is found, one of these incidents, they find multiple things. Well, you don't have a training certificate, you haven't been trained. There's 27.5. I think now it's up to like close to 40,000 now. This is years ago. I think it's close to 38, 36, maybe 40,000. But you get several of these violations, and then you've got to secure an attorney, or you can secure my firm, which we don't cost as much as an attorney. We specialize in negotiating those kinds of penalties down, and we're very successful at it. But you don't want to go there. You don't want to have those conversations. You don't want to get discovered to be negligent there. There's also they can make a case that you willfully disregarded the regulations and just entered the business without any concern for it. So any money that you've made in the last year all of a sudden goes out the window with a civil penalty to the federal government. And I say that not to scare anybody, but it is a very real possibility. And you just don't want to be in that sandbox. You don't want to play there. So much easier to step up, get quality training, commit to your drivers, invest in your people, demonstrate to them how concerned you are for their safety. And then they're going to want to work for you. Right. And then manufacturers are going to want to ship with you. Because of some of this extra hair that's attached to this part of the business. Again, I mentioned earlier, this isn't moving tennis balls. Anybody can do that. You're not just a courier driving stuff across town. You're bringing a level of expertise and a commitment to safety and professionalism, and that commands a premium in terms of revenue. And it also serves as a barrier to entry for some of your competitors. You mentioned that the prevalence of TikTok and how many people are getting into this. Yeah, that's great. But I think that the manufacturers, as they would ask that kind of individual, where did you get your training? Can you show me proof of your training? They're probably not gonna be able to secure as much business as, say, a legitimate company that's committed to solid training and built a relationship with that manufacturer. You can trust us with your very high dollar value package to get it from A to B safely, efficiently, professionally. And we know what to do if there's if there's an accident or an injury or an accident on the highway or just a simple traffic stop. We don't want to enter this business and do it poorly, is where I'm going.
Yeah, that's a great point, because if a courier service wants to differentiate themselves from the other Acme couriers in their area, you get the training, you get the education, you get the certification, and you do it right. I think that's a great place to wrap it up, Carl, because we're going to set ourselves apart in the industry by getting the training from transportation resource partners and by being educated on what the risks are and what they are not. Let's not be cavalier and be silly and about what we're handling. Let's not be overly freaked out. I had a guy ask me the other day, should I wear a hazmat suit if there's a specimen spill? It was a legitimate question, and the answer was no. That would be disconcerting to people that are watching, onlookers, and it's unnecessary. So let's get the proper training from Carl. Let's learn what the risks are and what they are not, what the government requires. You just mentioned possible fines. A $47,000 or $27,000 fine would be a big hit to any small courier company and any medium to large size company. That's a big hit to take, and it's unnecessary. So let's hook up with Carl. Let's get our training and certification, and let's make a difference in the medical community. Carl, do you mind sharing your contact information where people can reach out to you?
I do this business really quietly, this training business. Okay. I don't even have a website anymore. It just wasn't really doing very much for me. I know you've encouraged me to do that, and I'm really grateful for the presence I have on your website, and thank you again for that. Been on there for years, but people can just reach me at my email address, and that is, I'll say it first and then I'll spell it out. It's a little long, but it's trpartnercarl@gmail.com. That's TRPARTNERCARL, trpartnercarl@gmail.com. And I'm happy to take inquiries, and or if you don't mind, Ken, if it's easier for people who already have a relationship with Integrity Medical, I hope that you'll continue to welcome their calls and you can forward them to me.
As always.
You can always contact Ken Arnold and his very capable, qualified team, and they'll put me in touch with you and let us know how we can help.
Amazing. Excellent. Awesome. That was great. And you guys, Carl was holding back. I'm going to tell you right now, there's a lot of information that he did not share. And I specifically asked him to do that because, listen, invest in your business, Invest in yourself, invest in your clients, get the training that you need to safely handle and transport this. Don't be like every other Acme courier that's doing it and flying under the radar and hoping they never get caught. It's never a no-sum game. Sooner or later, something's going to happen. Don't be that guy. Don't be that courier company. So, Carl, thank you for joining us today. This has been great. I sure appreciate your time and your friendship, and we look forward to doing more together in the future.
We'll continue to go forward together, Ken. Chris, thank you so much for hosting us.
Carl, thank you.
Gentlemen,
Absolutely.
it's been my pleasure. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to help you out. Hope it helps everyone.
Absolutely.
Very good. All right.
Thank you. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We have the Medical Courier Connection podcast in a playlist, so you can follow that, and it'll notify you every time we post. If you're listening to the audio version, we are available on Apple Podcasts, the Podbean app, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Player FM, and Podchaser.
And again, thanks to Key Software. Thanks for your support, you guys.
Oh,
Really
yes,
appreciate it.
absolutely.
Hey everybody. Hey everybody. Hey everybody. Ken with Integrity Medical Courier Training.
I'm a medical courier. Of course I keep patient information private.
Dude, you are never gonna believe whose specimen I just picked up.
Oh! Oh, here it is. Dude, I don't know what any of this is. I wasn't paying attention in the integrity training class.
Yeah, that sounds a bit expensive. I think I'll just train them myself. After all, this isn't rocket science.
And we have liftoff of Antares with the